The story goes that one day around 850 CE, a goat herd named Kaldi noticed something strange. After nibbling on a patch of wild red berries, his animals became highly erratic and full of manic energy. Pinpointing the exact date is tough, but historical records confirm that by the early 1400s, people living in what is now Ethiopia were actively foraging for wild coffee in the dense forest undergrowth. To understand why the plant has this effect, we can look at this molecular animation. Coffee plants evolved to produce caffeine as a chemical tool. Biologists believe the plant secretes these specific compounds either to repel herbivores that might eat its leaves or to draw in pollinators by giving them a slight addictive buzz. Humans eventually figured out how to harness that chemical buzz for themselves. Early foragers began brewing tea from the plant's leaves and eventually moved on to mixing the raw berries with butter and salt to create a dense, highly sustaining snack. What started as a localized biological defense mechanism proved entirely too appealing to the human nervous system. Once people experienced the sustained energy the plant provided, they ensured it wouldn't stay isolated in the Ethiopian highlands for long. If we track the plant's physical movement on this map, we can see how coffee rode the established trade routes in the 1450s, crossing the Red Sea and making its first major landfall in Yemen. Upon returning from a trip to Ethiopia, a local Sufi leader realized the stimulant's potential and began prescribing it to his worshippers. The caffeine fueled them through hours of exhausting ritual chants and dances. From there, the Ottoman Empire got a hold of the beans and refined the preparation method. They developed the technique of roasting and grinding the raw harvest to yield the dark, bold beverage we recognize today. But this sudden popularity created immediate societal friction. Local authorities grew highly concerned about the intoxicating influence of the drink, openly debating whether Islamic law permitted Muslims to consume such a powerful stimulant. This tension climaxed in the year 1511, when a religious court in Mecca literally put coffee on trial. After extensive debate, the scholars ruled that the beverage was legally permissible to drink. Surviving that legal trial allowed coffee houses to spring up openly across Damascus, Istanbul, and beyond. In a matter of decades, the plant transitioned from an isolated religious tool into a permanent structural pillar of public social life. The Arab world held a tight monopoly on cultivation, but as this map shows, the barrier eventually broke. Seeds were smuggled eastward into India, and soon massive new crops took root down in Java. Concurrently, the Ottoman Empire introduced the drink to Europe. The public reaction was explosive. By 1663, central London alone boasted more than 80 dedicated coffee houses. These new spaces became hotbeds of intellectual output. In 1679, patrons sitting inside Garraway's coffee house watched Robert Hooke, the scientist who coined the biological term cell, publicly dissect a porpoise right in the middle of the room. Across the Channel in France, the culinary preparations shifted again as people began cutting the bitter brew with milk and sugar. These Parisian cafes fueled major Enlightenment figures like Voltaire, who allegedly put away 50 cups a day while he wrote. By replacing alcohol with a stimulant, Europe acquired a new chemical baseline. People were awake longer and thinking sharper, physically fueling the thinkers of the Enlightenment and the scientific revolution. Supplying this massive European demand required vast amounts of cheap labor. European empires aggressively expanded cultivation out into Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, relying on enslaved and exploited workforces to scale their output. The environmental violence matched the human cost. To create these ever-expanding plantations, growers systematically displaced local indigenous populations and burned down thousands of acres of native forests. This aggressive imperial expansion centralized production to an extreme degree. By 1906, a single country, Brazil, was exporting over 80% of the world's coffee supply. That exact same year, the beverage was mechanized. At the 1906 Milan World's Fair, inventors debuted the very first commercial espresso machine, officially tying the drink to industrial technology. In the decades that followed, the stimulant was structurally integrated into the industrial work schedule. By the mid-1950s, about 60% of factories in the United States had formalized the coffee break. In roughly 1,000 years, coffee completed its transition from a wild, regional curiosity to a megacrop that redefined the human work schedule for the industrial age. Today, coffee is a constant presence in markets across the globe. You can find it in countless modern forms, from high-end specialty beans to the canned, pre-prepared beverages lining vending machines across East Asia. Behind this commercial ubiquity, ethical struggles continue at the source. There is a constant push to secure fair wages and sustainable working conditions for the farmers manually harvesting these crops in Central America and East Africa. But if we look at this map, the equatorial bean belt where coffee thrives is facing a massive geographic threat. Because of climate change, this growing zone is projected to drastically shrink in upcoming decades, destroying the temperature and moisture parameters the plant needs. You can already see the visual reality of this environmental damage on existing plantations, where dead brown rows of crops sit unable to cope with the shifting weather patterns. This has triggered a desperate scientific race. Researchers are currently in greenhouses trying to engineer resilient coffee hybrids that possess the biological strength to survive these unpredictable new climate parameters. Humanity spent over 1,000 years violently remapping the globe to mass-produce this stimulant. Now we are relying on botanical science to protect the plant from the environmental instability of the industrial world it once helped fuel.